The question is often asked, is our children learning? Many people would say no, that the system has failed us.
Our country has failed us.
Facts. Some people would contend that our young generation of today is hopelessly cooked tomorrow.
Our young generation is clearly lost, man. Clearly lost, man.
Fortunately, today's guest is one of the people who are working on solving this problem. This episode of Thought Cabin features a very interesting conversation with a knowledgeable guest, and as a result, I have decided to present it in almost completely unedited format, because there was very little that I feel I could take out or add to enhance the experience. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Very pleased to welcome the second niche internet micro-celebrity guest on this channel, Jack Zhou, better known by his followers on X, formerly Twitter, and Substack as TraceWoodgrains.
Jack Despain Zhou, by the way.
Jack Despain Zhou. Okay. Is it like hyphenated or?
It's a double-barreled surname. I don't
Gotcha.
like hyphens for aesthetic reasons, but
that's fair enough. That's fair enough, man. All right. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you on. Let's start off with talking about your bio a little bit. What got you into policy and kind of analytical writing and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I grew up as a Mormon kid in Utah with strong opinions on the education system and otherwise mostly focused on questions of religion for a long while. So as a teenager, my attention was mostly on trying to figure out where I stood with regards to Mormonism. Dove deep into apologetics for a while before stepping back and feeling like I wanted to just focus on the spiritual side of things. Served a 2-year Mormon mission in Sydney, Australia. And during that time, I was pretty explicit that I was going to be trying to figure out, where I stood in relation to Mormonism, that I wasn't sure if how firmly I believed in it, but wanted to figure out.
Yeah.
Came back home and realized that I couldn't maintain a belief in it. And that really defined that early period of my life, was this process of stepping away from it. Concurrent with that, I had been frustrated with my time in school, so I stepped away from that and enlisted in the United States Air Force as a cryptological language analyst, Chinese speaking. And during that time, I started, as soon as I stepped away from Mormonism, I started writing first about Mormonism and my thoughts on my path out of it, and then more broadly about politics, policy, current events, and really trying to find my way in, as I put it, a world gone mad.
Yeah.
Particularly, after I had come from what had felt like a pretty functional community that happened to be based on something false, and stepping out into the real world and seeing what felt like a very dysfunctional set of communities got me really invested in trying to figure out what had gone wrong, what could go right, and what I should do about it. So
yeah, I relate to that a lot. So I am myself pretty religious, and religious thinking was definitely a big gateway into larger analytical skills. And I'm also a public school kid, and one of my parents is a teacher. And although I mostly study international affairs and space policy now, education policy is where I first cut my teeth. I was working for the state government of Maryland and as a youth advisor, and they would bring me in once a month to the state assembly where we would give our thoughts as young people on how the education system was functioning. So I'm very much looking forward to getting into that subject. So you're now in charge of the Center for Educational Progress. What exactly is that? What does it do? What are your kind of main policy objectives, and how do you plan on accomplishing them?
Yeah, it's a great question. The Center for Educational Progress, it has a goal to revitalize what I would describe as the excellence movement in American educational politics, and to reorient the American education system around excellence. If you look at the policy landscape in American education right now, what you'll find is an extremely well-developed ecosystem of people focused on what we could broadly term equity issues.
Yes.
So people focused on questions of poverty, people focused on raising the floor, and people broadly focused on the question of how can we equalize performance or things in that vein. You'll also find a pretty well-developed ecosystem around school choice.
Yes.
The question of, how can we expand charter schools? How can we do vouchers? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
What you won't find nearly as much as used to be in the past, and we can go into the reasons why, but you'll find very, very few that are explicitly focused on things like raising the ceiling and excellence in education. You'll find a few. You'll find groups like the Fordham Institute that work on it, but by and large, what you see are these policy dynamics where some locality, the equity movement, equity focus groups will push things that have the effect of, in the end, lowering the ceiling or downward flattening stuff. So things like removing 8th grade algebra in San Francisco, or things like trying to get rid of selective schools in New York City or elsewhere. And you'll have local groups that gather to try to oppose those things, but they lack this sort of national infrastructure. They lack this funding. They lack unifying focus. And so it always feels like they're on the back foot against these policies that seem to keep coming up and keep pushing things towards this. So what the Center for Educational Progress is trying to do is provide this centralizing, coordinating mechanism for a lot of these local groups to understand what's going on, to understand how to push things forward towards excellence, and look for how we can stop relitigating this frustrating loop of downward leveling, followed by realizing we don't actually want to downward level. That's really where our focus is.
Yeah. Well, you used a lot of phrases there that are kind of exactly what I wanted to touch on as well. Incidentally, as I was preparing for this conversation, I put together 2 infographics. I apologize that they're crude, but I was going to say, rather than having one unifying education system in America, obviously we have at least 50, state by state. It's the individual states that decide what the framework is for their residents. And then even beyond that, it fractalizes into, counties and cities and individual school districts, and even to a certain extent, individual school administrations. But it definitely seems like we have 2 very clear archetypes in education. We have, you might say, red education systems and blue education systems, and they both have their sort of strengths and their weaknesses. I'm going to share my screen actually to pull up the first one. So looking at the sort of red education model, can you see that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is like most of rural America, but in particular, these parts of these states that I've kind of highlighted here, they typically have like the lowest literacy rates on paper, or maybe like the lowest, public school graduation outcomes or what have you. But then they do have very robust school choice policies, as you mentioned. But usually they have things like a small property tax base, or maybe the state government is focused on funding other things that are going on, or just the simple fact that it's a rural location and people are spread very far apart means that people are not able to have as many resources as they kind of need to in order to get ahead. But people who are able to go to these sort of parochial schools and these private schools, some of those schools that they have, vouchers for or incentives to relocate or over towards, those are very strong schools, and they're able to experiment in ways that, other states are not able to kind of accomplish with their public-driven focus. So I'm going to pull up the other one. And then we have, obviously, the blue education model, and this is kind of what I grew up under. And so this is like a very big focus on public spending on education. And like you said, the equity model is a huge one. And not only that, but we see a huge focus on administrative spending in general, and a lot of different top-down approaches towards like imposing different objectives, policy objectives on teachers, and even to a certain extent on parents, related to, for instance, like restorative justice or, synergy or whatever the buzzword is. So how do you think we kind of extrapolate the strengths from both of these systems and combine them into something that actually works for everyone without these huge gaps in access, and in a way that, like you said, promotes excellence?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't want to understate the differences between the models, but I don't want to overstate the differences between the models also either. That is to say that a lot of times you can look at these structural things and you can say, and it's true that the US has, 50 different states, has county level
Yeah.
things, has local level things. But then you look at the question of what the curricula look like, what's actually being taught,
Hmm.
which schools the teachers go to, things like that. And you'll find a lot of commonalities throughout things that make the on-the-ground experience a lot more similar than one might naively expect, looking and saying, oh, we have 50 different things, 50 different states, surely 50
Sure.
different things are happening.
Hmm.
The other thing I'll say is that you have, yes, this like high funding model, high funding public school model in blue states and somewhat lower in red states, but you still have in every part of the country free, accessible public schools, things like that.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no part where that fades away, and in general, it's actually surprising. Compared to a lot else in politics, how similar the parties have historically been on education. So, for example, like the No Child Left Behind Act
Yes.
back in 2001, that was back when education was really a signature issue among the American public, which it stopped being since then. But during that time, it was a bipartisan act that everyone more or less agreed, this is exactly what we should do to get schools right.
Nowadays, everyone disavows it, though, but yeah,
it was terrible. It was terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, they disavow it because it was at the time they could have known and should have known
the perverse incentive that they were creating. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of how you move the best, I mean, I think No Child Left Behind is a good place to start with that because this was the last time that, you tried to synergize and get everyone on the same page. But
Yes.
the way they tried to synergize and get everyone on the same page at that point was saying, we all care about having this high, flat standard for everyone. And so what we are going to do is we are going to create this system of incentives that punishes schools that a certain amount of students fall below this flat standard.
Yes.
And we're going to just say schools are good if they have students above this flat standard.
Right.
And we're going to have this 12-year period where every school in the country is going to have the same amount of students above this standard. Now, at the time they made that, they knew it was nonsense. At the time they made it, they knew that, there are variations between individual students, and you are never going to have this mythical flat standard to apply to all of them. But it sounds really good to say, like, we have standards, we have accountability, we have these things.
Right.
And so what happened in No Child Left Behind is it created these perverse incentives where suddenly the schools that were working with the students who were struggling the most and the communities that were struggling the most, the schools, the teachers, the admins were told, you are failing, you are terrible, you are bad schools, it's your fault, and we are going to pull funding from you as a result. And they were sort of set up for failure with that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, schools that may have been more interested in raising students who are already at this standard, who wanting to push students past this flat standard, like you can't, when all your funding incentives are focused on what percent of your students are meeting this flat standard, someone who's above that, you're going to start treating them as a problem solved, like you don't have to worry about this. And they end up systematically being pushed to neglect those. So what do you do to fix this? What do you do to reorient it? Part of it is recognizing something that's been extremely obvious to everyone in the American public, but wildly controversial within education policy, which is that students learn at different rates, and good education policy needs to take into account that students learn at different rates. You want to, in terms of, you mentioned things like access issues, so forth. I think two of the issues that I'm really concerned about are geographical inequality and class inequality. That is, you have some states in the country, say like New York City has some fantastic selective schools like Stuyvesant High School, for example. Most states don't actually, or many states don't actually have selective public schools the way New York does. They don't have these like flagship free schools that students can go to and can have this top tier experience equal to like the best private schools in a public school. And one way that I think would be really useful to start looking at fixing some of this inequality and things is taking this seriously and saying, well, where are the gaps where students don't have schools like Stuyvesant, and what can we do to provide that? The other thing is the recognition that no matter what people do in terms of equalization in public schools, the United States has and will have private schools. And what that means is that if public schools aim at downward leveling, if public schools aim at, neglecting their students who need something more to excel, who are looking to push themselves,
then those students are going to turn towards private options, generally speaking.
Then the ones who have resources will turn towards private options, and the ones who don't have resources, who are depending on public schools, just wind up sort of getting screwed.
Mhm.
And so when public schools focus on downward leveling, it doesn't end up leveling the populace as a whole. It ends up creating this sort of class stratification where people who have options flee them and people without options get stuck.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's the sort of thing we want to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to a couple of things that you pointed out there. So, the school district that I attended in my K through 12 had something very similar to what you're describing in New York, which I was always very pleased about. This called career academies, where students in high school would leave their comprehensive high school for a few periods in the day, and they would basically get specialized vocational education in a particular discipline of their interest. So, for instance, automotive engineering might be one, or hospitality, or pre-med nursing, what have you. But there are a couple issues with that. Although generally this works out really, really well. I participated in a career academy. It gave me a huge leg up in engineering before I started studying it in university. Um, Unfortunately, that school is sometimes under a lot of meddling from the superintendent's office, and they'll try to like workshop a bunch of different like top-down directives upon them. So they'll say like, you're accepting all these gifted students into these advanced level programs. Well, why can't you accept more students who are of a lower level? Well, then if you did that, you would sacrifice the ability of those higher level students to kind of get more out of it, because you'd have to constantly keep slowing down for these other students who, didn't come in with the prerequisites, didn't come in with the skills, and so on and so forth. So this kind of brings up a couple of different issues. One of them is vocational training, and I'm curious where you think things should and are going with that, given that things are going to change in a very big way from disruptive technology like AI. So jobs are going to be changing, and the way that we train people for jobs necessarily has to change, but also in ways we can't anticipate. So yeah, I'm throwing out a lot of things out there, but kind of how do we deal with these two issues? One is administrative creep, and the other is technological disruption.
Good questions. So, in terms of technological disruption and vocational education, part of our focus on excellence in education, and we have an article on this about our Substack talking about the importance of excellence in vocational education as well. You've seen sort of a shift away from vocational education towards this like college for all ideal, where
Right.
the sense of if you're not going to college, then you're failing.
Yes.
And this idea of vocational education, and as much as it even exists, as just a dumping ground. AI is going to make that pretty interesting, as you're sort of alluding to. And one way it's going to make it pretty interesting is we're already seeing, and we will see in this increasingly, that artificial intelligence is threatening knowledge-focused careers, threatening like people using their minds type of careers, whatever,
Right.
a lot more than it is threatening people using their hands, people in people-focused professions, people in vocational type of careers. And so it will be important, I think, to reevaluate in part this idea of everyone going to college as this ideal, and to look for how can we really provide excellent, serious, focused training to people, training that doesn't treat vocational work as a dead end, training that treats it with dignity and treats it seriously. How can we expand and provide those options to people in the ways they need?
And of course, that trend also flies in the face of what the more affluent states and localities have been pushing for, which is a focus on STEM education, and particularly computer science. And now you've had all these people going into computer science careers who are struggling to find jobs and will continue to struggle more so. And I'm seeing that a lot of those school districts, school systems are not even willing to touch the AI problem. Like they won't let students use them in classrooms, and they're basically acting like AI is this fad that's going to go away. And I have no idea how these school systems are going to be able to adjust, given that they've poured so much money. It's like a sunk cost fallacy thing, I have to guess, on some extent. How exactly can schools and administrators who direct the schools make this pivot in the coming years?
Yeah, I do want to, in terms of AI in classrooms, this is one thing where it is worth thinking about what the role of the classroom is.
Yeah,
And AI is a technology that, like many previous technologies, promises and has many people promising
yeah,
to revitalize and fundamentally transform the classroom. The thing is, we've heard fundamentally transform the classroom before. We've heard it with
yeah.
books, we've heard it
Smart
with movies,
boards.
we've heard it with smart boards, we've heard it with many, many new technologies.
Mhm.
And well, artificial intelligence is promising. What it won't do is learn for us and just stick things in our head automatically
For
for
sure.
us. That
Hmm.
is, it can iteratively improve the process of skill building, but it
Yeah.
cannot replace the process of skill building.
Hmm.
And so when you're looking at things like AI in classrooms, the people who are, and this could change in the near to medium future where AI just becomes similar to in chess. There was a period in chess where the top players could benefit from using AI, and then at some point AI would just outperform everyone and the players would have nothing to add to it. We
Right.
could reach that point with all fields of knowledge where we have nothing to add to AI,
Mm.
and then it becomes like chess and people simply train against people for the pleasure of training against people. However, at least for now, the people who are going to be most effective at using AI are going to be the people with the most specialized knowledge and the most specialized capacity in the
Yeah,
specific domains they're using that AI for.
for
And
sure.
if you are replacing someone's training at an early stage with AI and just saying, say a writer, just use AI to generate this, that's fine. That's a mistake. It
Yes.
is important to actually train those skills in people, to train up that capacity in people, and so it is appropriate, I think, in classrooms uh, to be sensible about AI
Yeah.
restrictions, such
Well,
that you are actually building those skills.
it's definitely going to be, at least in the short to medium term, important to have humans in the loop. This is kind of a big buzzword phrase that a lot of people who are thinking about AI will often use, where like we have the AI systems, but they're not fully autonomous and they often hallucinate or they make mistakes. And it's super important to have people who are adept and knowledgeable enough to kind of check its work and, intervene if there's some sort of issue. But I really think probably the most accurate thing that anyone can say about the trajectory of this technology is that we don't know what it's
Yes.
going to do in the next few years. And so I would say, and this is just my layman opinion, that the most important thing is adaptability as far as what the decisions are that policymakers are making, to be able to respond to changes as they come out quickly and really respond to these kind of changes in the reality of what's going on in real time and not lag behind by several years, because students need to be preparing for the future, like not just the world as it exists now, but they're being trained for when they finally finish their education and have to go out in the world and navigate it. Yeah.
Adaptability is absolutely important. I do want to caution against a sort of adaptability as excuse against skill building that I
Yeah, for
think
sure.
sometimes you see, where sometimes people will treat this idea of, oh, we need to build like creative problem solvers. We need to build people to
Yeah.
adapt to modern economies, this or that. And what
Mhm.
that translates to is sometimes not learning hard skills, not developing like specific
Right.
technical expertise, things like that. And I think it's a mistake to avoid developing
Mhm.
expertise out of a desire to stay adaptable. That is to say, it is the people who are most capable at adapting are the people who uh, understand best how to build specific expertise, how to climb these narrow skill towers, so
Yeah.
forth, in a lot of ways. That said, yes, it is going to be important to recognize that we are in a time of a lot
Mhm.
of change. And even while it is important to keep building skill in that, a lot of things can change very rapidly.
Yeah. Another thing that is probably going to be huge is the sort of soft skills set, the human social skills, in a variety of different careers that'll probably be even more valuable than it already is. I anticipate that it'll probably be a lot easier to replace the average computer scientist than like, someone working in hospitality or what have you. So I'm thinking there's a whole social dimension to this as well. And we're also seeing some worrying trends with kind of the social development of children as well. Thinking about the receptivity towards learning and the ability to kind of interact with peers is kind of being threatened by children growing up around more technology than they are other children their age and that sort of thing. So how do the schools create kind of pro-social environments as well while they're also working on skills development?
That's a good question. And this is one of the core functions of school as school. And
Yeah,
one reason that, as much as I love homeschooling and as much as I love microschools and as much as I love these alternate forms, and I do love and appreciate them,
yeah,
I don't actually want them to replace the institution of the school.
right.
The role of institutions in general, the thing that institutions are really good at is aligning our short-term whims with our long-term goals and society's long-term goals,
Yeah,
and providing us environments to experience things beyond the limits of our own whims.
hmm,
And so, one thing that school does really well, as long as you actually create an environment where it's necessary, is allow people to get to interact and socialize with a lot of people,
yep,
around their age, around different ages, things like that. This is where things like phone bans in schools are really useful
hmm,
because phones, we have some of the brightest minds of our generation working to figure out how to make uh, technology, how to make
more
whatever app they're
addictive.
working on exactly as
Yeah,
addictive as possible, as compelling as possible,
yeah.
to make it grab eyeballs and hold on to them for as long as humanly
Hmm.
possible.
And
And
that's
when you have
especially hard for children who have lower inhibitions and lower self-control to
Yeah,
handle.
yeah, and when you have that in a classroom, you're setting people up for failure. You are begging them to fail. You are asking them
Yes,
to struggle, and it's just unnecessary. Like you want to change the external environment so that things like that are not
for sure.
constant struggles. Um, and yeah, you want to, in general, put people in environments where they will be expected to
Yeah.
uh, have people around them and to learn to interact with the people around them, not mediated by screens. That said, technology has its place in terms of connecting people, in terms of
Yeah.
meeting them. I don't think it's healthy to be a Luddite and say no technology ever or
Mm.
anything like that. It's useful to, help people develop a healthy relationship with
Well,
technology and everything.
especially from the perspective of being an education policymaker or even a teacher, uh, again, the large driving function of education is to prepare students for the outside world. And technology in the outside world is pretty much inescapable. You have to know how to do this stuff, and
Yes.
interact with it also. Um, Continuing with the subject of receptivity to learning, which again I think is increasingly a huge problem. We also have the kind of rising trend of like anti-intellectualism. So I kind of look at COVID as sort of a watershed moment for that, because not only did it frustrate the kind of psychological development of a lot of children who were imposed into staying at home and like online school models that don't really work for them for a year and a half, and that hurt their ability to develop discipline and social skills and all sorts of things. It also hurt the general public's opinion of educated people in general, and their trust in like doctors and medical professionals and things like that. And we're now seeing the kind of fallout of that 5 years later with sort of backlash against higher education. And, the federal government's kind of pulling a lot of grant funding and things like that. And if you go on social media and you see like NASA posts a video of like rover footage of the surface of Mars, the comments are full of people saying like, "Oh, this is fake. NASA's lying to us," et cetera. Or, a new vaccine comes out and people are saying, "I'm not letting anyone inject anything into me." How do we grapple with this rising trend of anti-intellectualism and make people hungry to learn again?
It's a good question, and I think it's multi-causal. I want to avoid at once uh, misunderstanding the parts of it that I sympathize with,
Yeah,
while also avoiding um, giving cover to the parts that I think are simply destructive.
for sure.
So there is a tendency sometimes among academia to treat all facets of academia as equally authoritative. To
Sure.
treat someone who has, for example, studied an education PhD or
Yeah.
studied that as the authority in education. To
Mhm.
treat someone who has studied physics as the authority in physics. To treat someone who has studied sociology as the authority in sociology. Yada yada yada.
For sure.
And that's not exactly how expertise works.
That's the credentialist fallacy, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, it's not in a lot of fields, it's not that far from how expertise works. So, for
Sure.
example, in the hard sciences, you really are going to struggle in a lot of the hard sciences to get better than the consensus of the experts in that field.
Yep.
And a lot of times, you'll have these people who have their theories of everything, the Eric Weinsteins of the world, who spin up these grand that the institutions are keeping me down theories, and most of the time,
Harris Howard.
yeah,
Yeah.
most of the time there's not much there. However, what you also have is a sort of lending of their authority to political questions,
Yeah.
and lending of their authority to not just a question of what is, but what ought to be.
Yep.
And then treating some of these ought to be's as just as certain and just as credible as
Yes.
these hardest is questions.
Right.
And people notice, particularly people who disagree with the academic consensus politically, notice that those things aren't actually as certain and as set in stone as the rest.
Yes.
That a lot of those things are simple opinions. A lot of those things do come down to someone's ethical beliefs, what have you. And sometimes there's this smuggling of authority in to try to get people to accept things that are junk. There are also areas in which the academy has directly besmirched its authority by just having bad ideas and intellectual fads that stick around. So you have things like the replication crisis. And in education schools in particular, you have honestly a field that in many ways is not even to the level of mentioning a replication crisis, because education schools are often so captured by fads and so captured by just spurious ideas that have no empirical backing whatsoever. So, for example, you look at learning styles, this idea that people have visual or auditory or kinesthetic learning styles. This is something that never actually had empirical support and has consistently been shown to lack empirical support, but something that has wormed its way into education curricula and has just sort of stuck around. And things like that are really damaging to expertise. So you have that. At the same time, you have people who look at that and then say, therefore, you can't trust the experts on anything. Therefore, vaccines are junk. Therefore, all of these other things are junk, and wind up tearing down a lot of infrastructure that takes a lot of time to build up, and tearing down a lot of knowledge that takes a lot of time to build up. And that's really destructive. So there's a tension there.
Yeah, and it seems to me that the most fundamental way to combat this is to ensure that people are educated and intellectually developed enough to be able to discern the difference between these two things, between scientism and real science, for instance, or between an ought statement versus an is statement, or something that is conjecture versus something that is, proof tested and things like that. And I honestly think that a lot of Americans they don't have the skill set to do that. And so winning back their trust, in higher learning, in, people with credentials, generically is going to be a tough sell. So that's a big question of how we do that. And then,
I'll push on that a little bit and say that, well, it would be nice to have this image of this perfectly educated populace who has the time and energy and effort and interest to dive into every topic and form their own opinions on every topic. Not even the smartest people work like that, and not even the most serious people work like that. At some level, you will always need to rely on networks of trust, and particularly people who don't have the time or energy, or people who are not necessarily intelligent enough to dive into every facet of every issue. You do need to trust people, and you do need to have reliable people around to trust. Historically, this is a situation where strong institutions are really useful, because you can just point to the institutions and say, rely on these. When institutions break down, the problem is that these networks of trust break down. You don't have people you can rely on as much, and so people are going to wander around in the wilderness a little bit more and are going to rely on shadier figures. And all you can really do there is build up better networks of trust and healthier networks of trust, trying to, lean on the best topics, and then try and figure out who are the people that this person trusts, who we can get convince of these ideas and persuade of these things. And in a decentralized system with weaker institutions, and that's what we're moving towards, that's the challenge that needs to be faced.
Definitely very difficult, especially because people are fragmenting based on their kind of social identification, or their tribe, or however you want to put it. Which that is a whole dilemma that probably cannot be solved over a single conversation. I'm also curious, real quickly, what is your thought on the robust and proper role of the humanities in education and society?
Yeah. So my thoughts on the humanities are that in theory, I really like the humanities. And in theory, I'm really frustrated at the extent to which people have fled the humanities and the extent to which they are sort of fading.
Yeah.
In practice, I think that the humanities are in dire straits, and I think that the humanities are in sort of dire straits of their own creation.
Yes.
That a lot of fields have been captured by the sort of monocultural, Marxism influenced left progressivism, you can say, that doesn't really take other ideas seriously, that doesn't really want to take other ideas seriously, and that sort of has used these fields as like tools towards their, create this societal utopia, left progressive utopia, whatever ends. And so I think that you need to have people who aren't doing that involved with the humanities. But that won't happen just by tearing the humanities down and saying, therefore, there's no value here, therefore, forget all of it, therefore, focus on other things. You actually need to, in a lot of these fields, build up alternate infrastructure and build up groups of people who are serious, who care about the topics, who are committed to them, who are willing to do something with them. So in education as a discipline is a good example here. Again, education schools, I think, are sort of ground zero for capture by this dynamic that I'm talking about. And to me, the solution to that isn't, therefore, it is fruitless to think of education as a discipline and fruitless to think of learning things as a discipline. There are a lot of things in education that could benefit from serious analysis, serious research. For example, you look at the question of when and how people learn things best, sensitive and critical periods in learning. And as you look at that, you'll quickly realize how easy it is to get to the limits of human knowledge there. So, for example, we know that it is possible to develop absolute pitch in children from about ages 3 to ages 6, that there is a pretty well-established way that you can develop that. And for a long time, people just thought, oh, this is innate. This is something that just happens.
I hear people say that now.
And it's not innate. It is something that can be trained during that time period, and then the sensitive period fades, and you can't really train it the same way.
Language acquisition is another big one like that, too.
Yes. But we don't actually know a lot about the specific limits of these critical and sensitive periods in different areas. You can look at things like chess and say no one who has started studying chess as an adult has reached the peak, anywhere near the peak of chess. And it seems to be not just a matter of simple time put in. But we don't have a lot of detail on things like that. And I would argue that one reason we don't have a lot of detail on things like that is because education as a discipline hasn't been serious. And has been, focused on some of these fads and focused on some of these other ends. So the thing you want to do with a lot of these things is, in some cases, look for what the solid infrastructure is, look for the best people around, and really start building alternates from scratch or just building up. In terms of the humanities and the proper role of it, I mean, I think that to have a revitalization of the humanities, one needs to treat a lot of university culture in the humanities as basically like something that needs to be worked around, as damage that needs to be routed around. But you don't want to then just whole-scale abandon the humanities.
Okay. Well, we're kind of running short on time now. But real quick to finish this off, if people want to support your project, what should they do?
So if people want to support our project, easiest thing to do is go to educationprogress.org and subscribe to our newsletter. If you want to get involved, we have a Discord channel where we coordinate with each other. Join that. We always welcome volunteers. We always welcome donations. And anyone who is looking to orient American education towards excellence, we want to work with them.
Awesome. Well, you put everything very well in this conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being a part of this, and thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yep, take care.
You have been watching